Hello and welcome to Trad Jazz Today. Dan Zeilinger has been a world-traveling trad jazz musician for the past 40 years. Some of his most memorable performances were on the lawn of the Edinburgh Castle, at the Imperial Palace in Japan, as well as TV shows and commercials around the world. Dan has met many people during his career and has spent many hours on and off stage with these musicians, talking about jazz, life, and more. Some are touring musicians, some are theme park warriors, and some are casual musicians who play on weekends with their friends. They all have stories worthy of a movie script, and through these interviews, Dan will be sharing them with you. Now, Dan Zeilinger.
Hi there, this is Dan Zeilinger with Trad Jazz Today. My next guest is somebody who I've been meaning to meet. We may have met, and I'm just getting too old to remember anymore. But we've had many friends in common, Tom Baker to name a few, and Eric Holroyd and Dan Barrett and Brian Shaw and all that gang. Originally an Australian native, from what county? What province?
I'm from, 90 miles northeast of Melbourne.
Ah.
Yes. Grew up in a country town called Euora, but pretty much Melbourne. So, yep.
Got it. And now lives in Vancouver, correct?
That actually, yeah. Well, we lived in Vancouver for a while. I've been in Canada for 20 years, and
20 years.
We now live in Victoria, BC. So
nice neighborhood. Nice neighborhood. Lots of good Chinese food.
You got it, mate. And the cherry blossoms are out, and just been for a walk down on the beach, and life's good on the West Coast.
Well, I'm in Anaheim, so.
Yep, I know Anaheim. I've been to Disney, and I've visited Dan Barrett. Well, he's in Costa Mesa, I think. Is that close to Anaheim?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. It's just right up the street, a few miles. And in fact, last time I saw Tom was in Brian's house in Newport Beach, Brian Shaw's place, and Tom made me one of his famous steaks. I know I had told you about that. But, anyway, let's start back at the beginning with you. How do you pronounce that? Your hometown again? Euora?
Euroa. 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 As in knock knock.
Who's there?
Euroa.
Euroa who?
Euroa the boat, I catch it a fish.
Hey.
Yeah, small country town, 2,500 people, wool growing area, 2 hours north of Melbourne. So
your father was a trumpet player?
No, he was a clarinet and saxophone player.
Ah, yeah. I know that he handed you a trumpet at age 5, I guess.
That's right. I actually originally wanted to play the clarinet, and Dad said, no, I don't have a spare one. So here you go, son. Here's a beaten up old Convictor. Go to town on it. So,
ooh, well, it's a nice horn to go to town on.
The problem was nothing worked on it, including me.
And you did something. You did a lot of things that are very dear to my heart. Brass bands.
I did indeed, Dan, and I have a lot of great memories. It's funny. I was just jotting my my recollections while I'm leading up to this moment, and I remember joining the brass band. Gee, it would have been the mid 1970s, and the band leader. The brass master was the band master, if you call him. His name was Jack Hill. And I think he would have been in his 80s back then. And he played this beaten up old cornet. And he used to stand up and he'd have this big bass drum with a pedal. And he'd count off Colonel Bogey. 1, 2, 1. Anyway, huge respect for Jack. He taught me how to play, and that was just a wonderful part of my life, playing in the local brass band.
Yeah, it's what a wonderful thing to be able to have the access to that kind of experience at such a young age.
Well, exactly. And what's interesting about that too is that my dad, he grew up in the era, so he was born in the mid 30s, self-taught. And he was a terrible reader. He admitted that until the day he died. So every Monday night, we used to, as a family, my sister as well, played clarinet. We would go to the brass band, and he played clarinet, and he loved it because it was a real challenge for him to read. And it was just like a family institution. Every Monday night we'd go off to brass band in the 70s. Right.
It was interesting for me. I came onto brass bands. Well, of course, most Americans don't ever get onto brass bands.
Yep.
There was one that rehearsed here in Long Beach that I became called Vintage Brass, and they're an offshoot of the Salvation Army type of group. But it was maybe 10 years ago. It was the first time I played with them, and a whole book of music I'd never heard. All of these original pieces that were written for the English bands, and
yep,
it's a whole nother world. It was wonderful to find something new.
Absolutely. Well, and see, I guess being part of the Commonwealth, a lot of the small towns in Australia were very influenced by the British, obviously, and the monarchy and the brass band, the brass band movements. A lot of these small towns, a bit like, I won't say we had the coal mines, but a bit like Brassed Off.
Mm-hmm.
And that's like the small town I grew up in. And a lot of my mates, we were all terrible players, but Monday nights we went off to play in the brass band. And we actually got pretty good too, Dan. And we knocked off Albury-Wodonga, which is a big regional centre of two cities between Melbourne and Sydney, for argument's sake. We knocked them off in the final, and it was great. And it was because we played the Glenn Miller Suite, and part of that, I think, was my dad standing up in the middle of it and taking a clarinet solo, improvising in a brass band. Right? Unheard of.
It's kind of unheard of, but I've listened to enough British brass bands to know that they have a very unnerving fondness for swing.
Yep, absolutely.
And most of the time they don't swing, that is. But,
exactly. Yeah.
But it's a wonderful. I love the sound. Over here in the States, I was a big proponent of drum bugle corps.
Okay.
And so my son is running one currently. But that sound, something about a brass sound is unlike anything else. A brass choir sound.
It's beautiful. And I remember just jumping forward, into the 90s, touring Europe, and was with Tom Baker. And I remember we were in a small town in Germany. I think it was somewhere like Iserlohn. I don't even know how it was pronounced, or Mönchengladbach or somewhere. So we're just in this small little town, and all of a sudden there's this brass band that comes marching through the streets, and they're all the guys are playing the rotary valves, and I think their A440 is A454, so I think they're all high-pitched instruments, but these guys were just fabulous. And the lead trumpet player looked like he was playing maybe left-handed, and he had some sort of injury, or he maybe had like I don't know if it was an amputee, but anyway, they're amazing, and we ended up following them. And they all went to the pub, and then they shut the door. All right, you guys are not welcome. We love you, but
it's time for beer.
Auf Wiedersehen.
Absolutely. Now, how old were you when you had your first a serious lesson, or were they serious right from the beginning?
Okay, so my sorry, I got the sun beating through here. So my teacher, Bill Scott. I'm just going to try to paraphrase that question into like about 10 or 15 years. So growing up in Euora, very limited with good facility players like the Brian Shaws, yourself, Dan Barrett's of the world, guys. Bill Scott was my teacher. Loved jazz, loved playing trumpet, and a fabulous guy, but not a great technician of the instrument per se. And when I was 14, I was sent to boarding school, and I had to have a cross to bear with that because I loved it, but I also hated it. But the part that I did love was the music faculty, and I had access to probably, if not one of the greatest trumpet teachers in Australia. His name is Reg Walsh, and Reg is highly acclaimed, highly renowned, and he was at Melbourne Grammar, the school that I went to. He was my trumpet teacher. And he knew where I was coming from, knew that I loved Louis, knew that I loved Bob Bernard, knew that I loved Bix, Wild Bill, knew all the cats. And he said, right, you're going to play a 3C mouthpiece and you're going to play like this. So I would say that my first real serious lessons were probably when I was about 14. I used to fool around with it in Euora, but I used to play off to the side of the mouth. No facility, didn't know anything about the diaphragm and breathing. So when I was about 14 or 15 was just was game on. It's like, okay, so this is how you play correctly. So.
Yeah, well, it's obvious that from what I've seen you play that you have a good foundation. So I was just kind of curious where that came from.
Well, and Reg is fantastic. He had this, and I've seen some of your other interviews, and it's interesting. There's a common denominator with, I guess, a lot of the interviewees and yourself, Dan, about the respect that we have for our teachers, right? And Reg, I have the utmost respect. He straightened me up, and he was I'm not going to put up with crap. This is the way you do it. And, Louis didn't play down there like that. So next day you're sort of coming in like this, and it was all about, just about the column of air. And this is what you do.
It's interesting that you have a trumpet teacher who would embrace, say, both a Jean-Pierre, a Maurice Andre and a Louis Armstrong type of. Quite often you find that trumpet teachers tend to ignore the Louis Armstrongs and the Bisbeitrix and that side of the instrument, and only go for the classical side. And it's difficult to jump back and forth for us having correct stylistic playing. So you're very fortunate to have somebody who liked both sides.
But Reg, okay, so we talk about an opinionated teacher here, Dan. So Reg used to say to me, look, I love, you want to play like Louis, that's great. But man, when you're playing that D on the trumpet above top C, I don't want you to play that open like Louis did. I want you to play that first valve. So he was one of those kinds of guys, right?
But just to acknowledge jazz is a big step for a trumpet teacher.
Right.
Exactly. At least from my world, now I was fortunate to take with a couple of studio players, and they kind of understood. I'm sorry, in the States, there's a big fad now to teach trumpet players never to use a T release, a T staccato release with the tongue.
See, okay, yep.
And I understand that, but in jazz, sometimes it's called for.
Yep.
So you have to have a teacher that understands both. What I'm saying is, it's wonderful that you had a teacher who understood all kinds of music.
Well, yeah, and I mean, let's face it, Reg loved Maurice Andre, but his hero was Clifford Brown, so he got it, and I mean, where did Clifford come from? Who were his heroes? So, right, so very fortunate, so, yeah.
Unfortunately, I don't think we're ever going to quite know what was going on through Clifford's head. I have a friend who actually has a recording of him practicing. His wife is vacuuming the floor and he's practicing. She's talking about getting dinner ready for the night. And some of the things that we all think were just spur of the moment genius, he's actually practicing in his living room. So I've got to find a copy of that somewhere.
My goodness, wonderful stuff, Dan.
But who are your influences? Other than, of course, the obvious Louis Armstrong, Bix Beiderbecke.
Okay, so, well, my influences, it's funny during this whole COVID thing, to quote Clint Baker, Count Basie saves. I've been on a big Lester Young rave. Lester is just so free, so musical, so melodic. So it's like a breath of fresh air. And recently, actually, I saw, not to name drop, but our friend John Eric Kelso posted something on Facebook about an alternative take of Lester doing Lady Be Good. And it just sort of throws everything on its A dash dash, because, like the solo that we've all learned, ba-da-ba, All of a sudden you hear an alternative take after 50 years that I've been alive of Lester doing something, and it's just hallelujah. You know, so I would say Lester is a huge influence. You know, in my lifetime, my big heroes obviously were Tom Baker. And the guy that was his hero and also my hero is Jim Goodwin. I got to know Jim pretty well. I've got a bunch of cassettes down here that Jim made for me. I've got his cornet and his trumpet somewhere here. Aid Monsborough. Aid was considered the father of Australian jazz. I knew Aid all my life. Bob Bernard. But if you go back to the early days, Louis, and I love a lot of those beautiful swing players. You know, obviously Roy Eldridge, Hot Lips Page, Emmett Berry, and then and obviously Benny Goodman, the great clarinet players, Omer Simeon.
You're probably a Jabbo Smith fan also.
Oh, Jabbo is wonderful. I love him. Yeah, he's great. Yeah. So all of the great guys, you know.
How did you personally learn to improvise? And how old were you when you took that on?
So that's an interesting story, actually, because I used to go in Australia. I'm not sure if you've ever heard of, they have this annual event from Boxing Day to New Year's Eve called the Australian Jazz Convention. And it started in 1946. And every year my dad went to that. He loved it. And a lot of amateur musicians, no pay, but I got to see Art Hodes, Dill Jones, Sammy Price. Who else did I get to see? Dick Carey came one year. I didn't see Dick because he was in Brisbane. I would love to have seen him. Love that stuff he did at Symphony Hall or at the New York Town Hall with Louis. But so I used to go to these jazz conventions every year, and I first met Tom in 1980, and I was a bad player because I was only 10 or 11 at the time. But just to jump forward, so I was always exposed to these festivals, to improvising. I'd have a go at it, but I was pretty self-conscious of just, you know, I'm trying hard, but I'm not getting very far, if you will. So it was in 1987, actually, after I finished year 12. I did year 12 trumpet, and I had this beautiful bench trumpet. I know my dad at the time paid a lot of money for. I was like, well, what am I going to do with this? You know, now I've finished school. What am I going to do? And I had a couple of buddies, Joe Stevenson and Stephen Grant, who were in my year at school. I'm going to have to learn how to play jazz. So in 1988, I worked on the farm back in Euora. I was, worked with sheep and fencing and cattle and machinery, and every night I would practice playing the trumpet. And finally the floodgates opened, and it was Bob Bernard playing something, Music to Midnight with Ricky May or something like that, and he played a solo of I'm Confessing, and I learned it note for note. And then all of a sudden the blue notes and grace notes, or particularly the blue notes that Bob was playing, really resonated with me. And it's like, oh, hang on, aha. So if he's doing that over that, does that mean I can do that over this? And then subsequently I learned Louis solo over Tin Roof Blues or Back of Town Blues, one of those tunes. And it was really just the perpetual motion then, you know what I mean? It was something intrinsically that I guess I just grabbed onto and taught myself. I don't think it was like, okay, so this is a D minor 7, this is the G7, this is C, so you need to play this. I think it was something that I just heard and just repeated over and over again, Dan, until all of a sudden I clued in that I could play those patterns over different chord changes in different keys, if that makes sense, and still sound inside and harmonically correct. So, yeah.
So it's interesting. I'll tell people that there was only one trumpet solo I've ever transcribed in my life, and it scared me. And that was That was Chet Baker's Autumn Leaves.
Oh, wow.
And the reason it scared me was I couldn't stop quoting it. It's obviously it's one of the most beautiful solos ever done, and it so influenced my playing that it scared me from ever transposing anything again and try to make everything my own.
Yep, I hear you. And I think one of the greatest things that one of my, I don't know who it was one of maybe my dad or one of his friends, he said to me, you want to learn everything you can about chords, everything, but as quickly as you can, forget it. Yeah. Like, don't have that analysis paralysis where you go into every tune and say, oh, here comes a D minor 7. Oh, look out for the A half diminished. You know what I mean? It just becomes a function of the music, and think more in more sort of a linear or lateral sense rather than just sort of getting paralyzed by what the changes are.
It's interesting. Almost verbatim, Clark Terry said that very sentence in a clinic.
Really?
Oh yeah, he said learn all your theory, learn all your scales, learn all your modes, and forget them.
Wow. Huh. Well, I'm in good company there. That's wonderful. That's fantastic.
Isn't that nice? No, I happened to be at one of his clinics and he said that. I went, whoa, dude. So.
Well, there's always that rivalry between Melbourne and Sydney. In Melbourne, they call it the A half diminished, and in Sydney, they call it the A minor 7 flat 5.
Any scholastic you talk to will tell you that there's no such thing as a half diminished. But,
yeah, right. Oh, I love it.
And it functions differently anyway. But that's beside the point. I was never one for analysis either. You know, I could learn 2-5-1 till it came out of my ears, and it wouldn't connect in the middle of a song. If I stood up for a solo on a stage with a spotlight on me, I won't think, okay, now how do I tear apart this solo? And
but what's interesting though is I've been in touch with Dan Barrett a few times about, hey Dan, what's the chord over that? I hear let's say for example an E flat minor 6 or whatever. He said, well, slow it down, put it in Audacity or whatever it was, and listen to what the bass is playing. And he could be playing a C. So it all, like I get it when you're a rhythm player or a bass player, you really need to know what the function is, because well, the first chord of Blue Lou, as a front line player, one of us, the long note guys, you think it's like a G flat. No, hang on, it's a C half diminished, because the bass player's playing the C. You know what I mean? And it makes all the difference. And it's just the function of
That's actually kind of funny and dangerous. I came onto this style, and I came on especially to being a tuba player in this style fairly late. I was already in college before I got adopted, kidnapped by Dan Barrett and those guys. And so a lot of the stuff I was doing over my first 10 years of playing was strictly seat of my pants. Dan would throw me in the deep end and see if I could swim.
Love it.
Now, in some ways, it made me think very musically, but in some ways, it also, I would hear things that weren't there, or you know what I'm saying?
Yep.
Until I came into a band where they had transcribed some of the arrangements I was on off of an album, and they're using my function as the tonic.
Yep.
And it was wrong. And I say, where did you get these changes? Oh, we got it off your album. Oh, okay. Let me tell you, that's what I heard 15 years ago, but I found out that's not right. So.
Hey, can I ask you a question?
Yes, sir.
So this is sort of like a bit of an urban myth, and I want to hear this story about, because I saw your interview with Dan, and you're talking about the Southern Comfort Jazz Band, and wonderful Howard Olden. And what is the story about Howard's interaction with Ray Brown? Were you there when that happened?
Yeah, but I wasn't there. We were separated. I remember being on stage. It was a television show called The Merv Griffin Show.
Okay.
Was it Lorenz Almeida? I think was playing guitar, and Howard had known him. And here we are. I'm a really wet behind the ear college kid at the time, and the guy says, "Hey, Howie," and I was like, "How do you know these people?" And I guess that was. He talks about what Ray Brown went past him, said there's this incredible banjo player or something, and Ray Brown said it must have been Howard or Howie or something.
Well, the story that I know is that Ray Brown walked past and stared at Howard and went, "Huh, banjo. What about little giant steps?" And then Howard, da 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 dee.
That's right.
And then about 20 seconds later, he proceeds into the Coltrane solo. And
oh, the year that I toured with those guys.
You're apparently just like.
Of course, we were all snot-nosed kids at the time, and one of the things, for example, Danny Barrett put on his resume for the Southern Comfort Band was he claimed that he could name every World Series winner in history.
Okay.
He had no idea, but we'd get onto a radio show, and one of these radio hosts would ask him, "Oh yeah, well, who won the World Series in 1932?" And Dan would say, "Why? That was the White Stockings." And he'd say, "Okay, going on." He'd just give him an answer. Same thing with Howard. We were on a radio show, and Howard walks in with his banjo, and it was a very famous jazz guy in Chicago at the time. I don't remember his name. And he sees banjo, and he sees Howard, and he says, "I suppose you're going to play something like a banjo tune like Malagueña." And Howard took up the next 3 minutes of airtime playing Malagueña.
Oh, beautiful. Love it. Great.
Very much a Howard. If you saw my interview with him, you know that he sure has changed a lot.
You know what? I haven't seen it. I guess I've sort of been out of the loop, but I'll check it out. Is it on YouTube?
Yes, sir. It's on my channel. Somewhere.
All right, I'll check it out, Dan.
Most of these guys we talk about, I've interviewed.
Fantastic.
A lot of them anyway. I'm surprised that you got that quote from Bob Williams. That kind of surprised me.
Well, you are. You're doing God's work for traditional jazz, my friend. You're doing it great.
God doesn't. I'm telling you, God doesn't pay well. Oh.
And I won't start. No, I'll leave that one alone. Okay.
I'm just on the wrong end of the racket. Well, where were we now? We're talking about improvisation and how you got into the early jazz world. That was just from what I understand, you found big band first.
Well, okay, so when I was at boarding school, Melbourne Grammar, I played in the big band, and it was really after I left school. So 1987, 1988, so I was 18, 19 at the time, that I kind of learned to improvise. And then it was in 1989, so I was 20 at the time, I moved back to Melbourne because I was from living on the farm, and pretty much supposedly went to college and really just pursued a career in music. And I was working, I had 2 or 3 gigs a week, and I was, it was great. I was terrible, but it may be loud, but it is wrong, but but I was having a crack, and it was good. And I was surrounding myself around good guys, good Melbourne guys, and I used to go to all of my dad's gigs when he was in town with Roger Bell and Abe Monsborough and Dick Tatum and all of those guys, and they were all so supportive too, because for them, I guess it was like the passing of the torch, and very encouraging. Ian Smithy, who was always in the drummer with the Fireworks Jazz Bands for all of our tours, and great friends with Tom. Smithy, I think, was with Tom's band, I think it was the first band that went to Sacramento in 1977 or 78. But all those guys were so encouraging. So, so then it was in 1991 that we formed at the time, the Hotter Than Six Jazz Band, and that was with Joe Stevenson, who was my best friend at school, who was a medical doctor in his spare time, which he was studying, and magnificent clarinet player. And I still to this day remember some of those crazy duets, just million choruses that he did with Alan Vichet, and also Abe Most at Sacramento, and Bobby Gordon, and wonderful stuff. Yeah, great memories.
Love Bobby Gordon.
Oh yeah, who doesn't? He's incredible. Yeah, love him.
I met him through Bill Dendel
Okay.
with the San Diego guys. But our circle of friends, our circle of musicians is a special lot, don't you think?
I couldn't agree more. And I was just going to, that was sort of leading me on to my next point is in 1992 or 3, I decided to go on a sabbatical, if you will, but just go traveling. And my first port of call was Sacramento to the Jazz Festival. I got to sit in with Sons of Bix, and it was actually Randy Reinhardt who was playing that weekend, not Tom Pletcher. Now, Tom Pletcher and my dad were really good friends, and they made an album together. But I had some doors open, and I didn't know these guys. And who was the leader of Sons of Bix? Anyway, and anyway, it'll come back to me. But I got to meet Tommy Saunders, and then I remember through a friend of a friend, all of a sudden I get this letter sent to me, or via fax at the time, from Jim Cullum. And Jim Cullum had said, "Hey man, can you come down to the Landing in the next couple of weeks and do an audition? Just want you to come and do a night with the local band. And if it's good, I want you to stick around." So I ended up sort of staying in San Antonio on and off for 2 or 3 months. It was fantastic because Jim would go out of town, and I'd play the off nights with the quartet, and played a couple of nights with the band, and that was just magnificent. And just word of mouth, right? Just like the extended family, and it's a beautiful thing.
Yeah, and once you get started, sometimes it's difficult to stop when the word gets out,
Absolutely. And it was like the same like that in Europe as well. So then I went on to Europe and met these guys in Nottingham. I lived in Nottingham for close to 6 months, and then Ben Person, who did the 50 Hot Choruses, was a good friend of my dad's. He flew me over to Stockholm for a week, and did some school shows with the kids, and played with Kus Bandit, the big band over there. All friends of friends, So I guess a lot of the doors were open thanks to my dad, but also just, hey man, you're a young musician, you're having a crack, you're in town, the doors are open.
Show us what you've got. Yeah, that's very much the attitude in Europe.
Yep, Steve Yoakum was another. I remember walking up and down Bourbon Street, Chris Tile. Hey man, come down to the Can, come and play. Yoke, come down to I think it was the Maison Bourbon, you got your horn. Come on, man, get hot. Great stuff. Yeah.
And then the night doesn't end.
It's called being young.
Oh, I have forgotten, my friend. I have forgotten. I'm afraid to say.
Yeah, and Tom Baker. I mean, we could go on a rave about Tom, but gee, he was one of those guys, Dan. He was really put you out there, and I remember it clearly. My mum went to Japan with my dad. He was playing with Len Bernard's band with Bob, and Tom was on the plane as well. And Tom and Mum sat together, and Tom just literally went through his address book and gave Mum all of his contacts in Europe and the States for when Simon goes traveling to look these people up. Ad van Beirendonk, a bass player in The Hague. Robert Veen, the most incredible sweetheart sax player who sadly is gone now. But these guys all, because he used to go to Holland for months every year, but he just gave me all of his contacts. So while I was there, I'd get on the phone and then it's like, hey man, got a gig for you, you know, or a house party, and just wonderful, you know. And Tom was always pushing like that, you know, to get us kids out there. Wonderful to have influences like that in our lives.
When I was in Australia, when Tom first arrived, and we had gone out, played something, and I said, "So what do you miss? Is there anything you miss from the States?" He said root beer, thick milkshakes, and graham crackers.
Love it. Well, you know the story about Tom, eh? You know, when he moved, you know, how he moved to Australia. He moved there with his family. I think he was from, is it Escalon or Lodi, somewhere like that. Virginia, his mother had a teaching contract to teach exchange as an exchange teacher in Australia for a year. So the plan was Jeff and Tom's brother, and the mum and dad, Virginia and Tom's dad, went to Australia. And while they were there, the plan was to build a sailboat. And they were going to sail back to the US. And Tom's dad sadly got sick, and then they cut the trip short, and then they flew back. But Tom so fell in love with Australia that he stayed. So, yeah.
He made quite a name for himself.
Well, he sure did. And apparently the Balmain Jazz Convention in 1976, even with electric bass, Chris Clark, when they started with Annie Street Rock, apparently the place just erupted. There was the jazz convention, like this Tom Baker's San Francisco Jazz Band with Paul Furness, Eric was on second trumpet, and and the place apparently just went wild. Yeah, crazy stuff. Great.
Yeah, Eric was a trip. He was basically my roommate when he traveled with 10th Avenue, and we got to know each other maybe a little bit too well. But
did he get you to wear the funny glasses?
Oh yeah, I'm on the picture. Yes, absolutely. His big thing about me was the fact that I turned him on to Schilke mouthpieces.
Oh, okay. He liked the shallow, well, because he had a great range.
Yeah, actually, I think we were in Astoria, Oregon, or somewhere, and he was looking. He said, "Daniel, you know, I'm thinking about trying to get another mouthpiece. What would you?" And I turned him on to a Schilke 12-4A, which is pretty shallow, but it's got that really forgiving inside rim.
Okay.
It's very comfortable. And he just thought that was the greatest thing in the world. So now he always says, my very good friend, Dan Zeilinger from the United States, recommended this mouthpiece. So.
I'll tell you what, Eric, oh wow, what a crazy good influence he was as a kid. He was always at jazz conventions, and he was just tireless. He compiled the Holroyd chord book, and I'm sure you probably saw it, with his own handwriting. Great, you know, like a calligraphy pen. You know what? I might actually have. What do I have here? Here's a great. Oh, look. So how's that?
There you go.
And that's all Tom. So that's all like original rags. This is all Tom's handwriting. But Eric compiled a book. It was, you know, like really thick, like a telephone book of great tunes. And we all had that. That was like the Bible back in the late 80s and 90s. Yeah.
Yeah, his Wolverine new Wolverine jazz band, right?
That's right. Yes. Yep.
Yeah. I had a chance to travel with him, and then anytime 10th Avenue would go over to Australia, Ross Anderson was nice enough to kind of host the band.
Yep.
Another wonderful fellow.
Ross is great. I think he's officially retired.
Yeah, I've actually tried to get him for the show, and he says, "No, I'm done." You didn't even want to come on to do an interview.
You know what? Okay. Have you tried? Speaking of guys that have retired, have you? Do you know Bob Bernard? You know Bob?
No.
Okay, Bob. Yeah, okay. He's a living icon. He was, you know, red hot. You know who I'm talking about, right? Yeah, and it's funny, his solo with the early Len Bernard band of 1919 March, the Uptown Lowdown jazz band with Burt Barr, they actually scored it out, his solo.
Oh, okay.
Yeah. So, yeah, and but anyway, so yeah, Bob would be one of those, another one of those great old Aussies to get on the show as well.
I would love to have anybody who'd like to come on. You know, it's just a little bit different if I have no connection with them whatsoever. But
absolutely, no, I get it, mate. I get it.
I don't mind it. It just means that I have to really use my talents as an interviewer to be more comfortable.
Yeah, totally. Especially if they're not so talkative, right?
Yeah, I don't know if you know. We have a cornet player here in the LA area, Chet Jaeger, the leader of the Night Bloomin' Jasmine.
Chet, I love him. I saw him in Pismo Beach last year, and man, I love him. He's a beautiful cat.
I interviewed him. 96 years old, still practices an hour a day.
Yeah, and he always says, "Hey, man, all he wants to do is talk about Australia." And I think he's always been fond of my playing, and I love him. He's fantastic, and I think he's got like about 30 great grandkids, and he's amazing. He's wonderful.
Well, not meaning to pop your bubble, but everybody loves your playing, Simon. Truly,
oh dear.
Truly, you're a very talented man, and anybody who, your fondness for Louis and Bix and those guys, and for the style shows in every note you play.
Oh, Dan. Well, I'll tell you what. I've got to say, I'm very touched. That's lovely you say that. The other thing, mate, is it's been really hard to fight all of this sort of inertia, right, during COVID. We all need a kick in the backside, get the vaccine, and I want to get playing. I want to get hot again. I just man, it's just crazy.
Well, I have a feeling that there's nothing going to be able to stop it. It's kind of like back pressure in a radiator.
Roaring 20s, baby. You watch. I really think so. Except there won't be any prohibition per se. Yeah. Yeah.
Can you imagine? No, well, I agree. I think that there's going to be a party.
There's so much pent up pressure, anxiety, repression, everything. I think everybody's just so sick to death of Amazon and Netflix. We just want to get out. We want to go traveling. And actually, if there's one thing that I would suggest to everybody out there that's watching is, if you want to travel, I would suggest taking the risk and booking early, because I have a feeling everything is just going to get jammed. I think we're going to see...
And more expensive.
Yeah, well, yeah, exactly. You know what I mean? So, yeah.
Well, what a pleasure it is. Thank you so much for coming on.
Hey, Dan.
If you talk with anyone who you think would enjoy being on the show, or that you can give a safe spot for, I started this in July.
Yep.
And I have close to 100 interviews now.
It's fantastic.
And one person I've had problems getting on. That's Bria.
Okay. Well, she just became a mum a few months ago, right?
Yes, I know, which is why I'm not pestering her right now. But
have you what about have you spoken with Evan? Evan would love it.
Oh, Evan Christopher?
No, Evan Arnson.
Oh, no, I haven't. I have had Dan Levinson on. Dan Levinson was funny, just because he was talking to me about how Dan Barrett was such an influence in getting him started. And he says, "I'll bet you I have a record here that you don't have." And pulls out, and it's a Southern Comfort record. I said, Dan, I'm the tuba player on that album. He said, what? He looked at it.
Oh, I love it.
That was pretty good.
Have you done one? What about Vince Giordano? He'd be really interesting. You'd need about five shows with Vince. He'd be really interesting.
I don't know Vince. I would love to do it. He's had so many names go through that band.
Well, and just what he's doing for just the legacy that he's creating, and just what he's doing for our kind of music.
I have got Cynthia Sayer.
Yep. Nice.
I've done Banu Gibson and a few people. I actually had Gunhild Carling booked, and then she didn't show up for her interview.
Okay. She's living in is she living in the Bay Area or
yeah, she's right here in California. Howard, you know Howard Miata.
Yeah, I know. Oh, yeah, Howard's great. I played quite a few festivals with High Sierra, so Howard and I are good mates. He's terrific. Love him.
Yeah, Howard did a couple gigs with her, and told her about my show, and she said, "Yeah, I'll do that." And anyway, so there's some believe it or not, you ready for this one? I don't have Brian Shaw yet.
Brian Shaw. Wow.
And
well,
he's the one.
Now remember, I want to just throw this out and just Brian. I love him. Always a huge, just so supportive of my playing and just a great cat. And he did me and the band a real solid. Remember I told you about the cassettes that guy John Chalmers compiled.
Sure.
Yeah, and I'm just getting permission from the band to release the CD. Actually, I've got it here. Here's a copy of it. There's the CD that actually Dan Barrett did the sleeve notes too, and it's
Wonderful.
us touring. It's us touring in 1998 of Santanella, and that's where I think you were at because that was one of Ed Zimbrick's festivals.
Yeah, it was.
We went on to Sacramento, but I got to say, when I got the cassettes, Brian Shaw chased down John Chalmers and got the originals, and I then drove up to his house after the Orange County Festival that I played with High Sierra, and Brian, almost pro bono or gratis, just basically said, I want to mix it and help you guys, and then put all the timestamps on them and did everything. So he's
wonderful.
So I'd like to get that out. It's not a money maker at all, but what it is just for posterity. I think there's just such great music. Bob Williams has shown a great interest because Tom Baker had just been playing trombone for like a year, and it's just a monster on it, just so loose and just anyway. So getting back to Brian Shaw, so yeah, I love him. I can't say enough great things.
Well, he was one of the guys who brought me into the style originally.
Okay.
He and I went to college together, along with Dan Barrett and Charlie Warren and Paul Waltz and all those guys. We all went to the same college, and that's how I got brought into this. But before we go, what are you doing playing bass sax?
I was going to say, Paul Waltz actually he did some repairs on mine.
How long did it take?
Well, I had to deal with I think I might have had a visa back then. I had to deal with the bloody border. But anyway, the bass sax it was my dad's, right? I had two of them. A couple of funny stories, actually. So the first one I inherited when Dad died. It's a beautiful old Busha. And then I bought one. That had beautiful silver bass sax with gold keys. And I got it delivered to the Sacramento Jazz Festival where I picked it up. I was living in Australia, and I think Paul did the repairs on it. But anyway, the mouthpiece that I've got is an old baritone Otto Link 10-star, and Vince has always said, "Oh, I want that mouthpiece." So anyway, it takes a lot of wind. It's a good hat stand at the moment, gathering dust, and one day I might play it again.
I played a bass sax for about 6 months. I had borrowed Ralph Reynolds' bass sax before he moved to Florida back in the day. And when he moved, he took it with him. So that was the end of that.
Well, the thing about it is, you being a tuba player, Dan, you can see why the bass sax went out of vogue, right? I mean, it's just because you don't have the resonance.
Oh, but I love the sound, especially a slap tongue. Just wonderful.
Well, there's that fabulous guy. I mean, I think we've got to hear the closest thing to Adrian Rollini that you'll ever hear in the flesh, and that's Franz Schuster, the great bass saxophonist from Sweden. He's incredible. And it's a beautiful sound, but you just got to, unlike the tuba, because you don't have that natural decay, it's the shape of the notes, I guess, is like that. So you've got no sustain, And it's just like,
Yeah,
after playing it a bit, I have the utmost respect for guys like Rollini. Oh my God. I mean, he's just what a giant, right? What a sound. Yeah.
great stuff. Now, when is that album going to be available for people to listen to?
Well, what I'm going to do, I'm just waiting to get permission from a couple of the guys. I'll send the link, and I'm actually going to put it. I've got it as a continuous stream on YouTube.
Okay.
Yeah, and you know what? We might actually get some more made. And then, look, here's the photo on the inside. There's a photo of Tom at the top.
Yeah.
And then the other one of us at the Anderson split pea soup, which I think is Santanella.
It is.
There you go. And there's Joe and I. And then all these beautiful sleeve notes by the one and only Dan Barrett. Dan spent a lot of time writing these. So, it'd be nice to get this out. So why don't we keep in touch? And
Please do. Yeah, I'll make sure to throw some plugs your way.
Awesome, mate. Well, we need to get playing, right?
Yes, sir. Thank you so much once again for this interview. You'll probably be coming up on air in about a month and a half.
Beautiful, Dan. Well, you're doing great work for keeping our music alive, and it's great to see your face, mate. And thank you so much for having me.
Take care, sir.
Good on you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.
See you, mate.
Thank you for watching Trad Jazz Today. Dan posts new interviews every Monday, Wednesday, and Friday. Make sure to check out the archive of past shows, and please give us a thumbs up when you subscribe to the channel. Bye.